Good morning, good morning. It's Make It Happen Motivator. It's time to put on your detective hats. It's time to get out your magnifying glasses. And it's time to do a little bit of reflection to tune into and get clarity of what you'd like to have happen this week, thinking about how you need to be, but also what kind of resource and support that you need. But I'd also like to share with you a little bit of a story and ask you to think about what is your purpose for chatting. Probably when those of you know me will know my story that back in 2012 I was a mums and daughter relationship coach, and my daughter hated me and she was living on the streets, and I was heartbroken. I was like, how come I can help all these people at work but I can't help my own daughter? And my husband said to me, and also somebody else, I remembered over the weekend somebody else asked me, what would you, that's right, I rang Parent Line, and Parent Line said, well, what would you tell your clients to do? And so did my husband. So I took two people asking me the same question, and the essence of it was, what I would tell my clients to do would be to have someone they could talk to, like me, that's outside of the system, somebody that wasn't part of the family, that wasn't part of the business, somebody that was going to be neutral, if you like, and also wouldn't be part of the patterns that are already created within that system. Someone that I could talk to get clarity of what I wanted and confidence in myself to make that happen. And the second thing that I would do is, if I'd be working, when I'm working with my clients, a lot of the work isn't about what it's not the daughter, it's about helping the mother or the parent or the manager or the owner, whichever person's trying to change the relationship or change the reaction that they're getting. Is actually making sure they have clarity of what they want and that they're confident in who they are and how they're delivering it. And a lot of the attention is not on the other person, it's about them and how they need to be. And what I'd been doing was really asking my daughter what she wanted, what she needed. I was paying attention, and I got to the point where I was changing who I was so much to accommodate what she needed, trying to be this flexible, trying to be this really helpful mother. And what I'd inadvertently done is she had no boundaries, because I kept changing. She didn't know what was stable, what was consistent, what was going to be, dependable. And so in that moment, when she said to me, do you know what, Mum, you only ever listen when you're paid. Yes, that criticism really hurt. But when I went back, what I did, and that's what Clean Language has given me the tools to do, and what I do with my clients, you go, okay, so what's the difference? When I'm listening at work, when I'm listening to my clients as a coach, that's like what? And when I was listening to my daughter, that was like what? And it was actually that criticism that became the catalyst of me going, actually, what's my purpose for chatting? And one of the big things is that, obviously, when I'm listening to my clients, generally speaking, they're not criticizing me or moaning about me. They are moaning about their life and other people, which is why having someone you can talk to who's outside of your system is so important, because they're not going to be triggered or emotionally attached to what's being talked about. Because yes, you doing whatever you're doing as my client will, I care about you as a human being, but it's not going to directly impact my circle of influence at that moment. So I can hold that space without emotionally reacting. But what I also found out when I started looking at it is that, so my clients weren't criticizing me, generally speaking. They might criticize the questions, they might criticize the silence, they may not be happy with something that's going on, they may not be enjoying the process, they might feel it's uncomfortable, it might upset them, it might activate some emotion for them, which means that they have some emotional reaction to things, but it wasn't about me. So that was the first thing that was different, is when I'm listening at work, it wasn't personal. The second thing that was happening at work that wasn't happening at home was that I knew when my clients turned up that it was for a 90-minute session or for a whole day retreat or a 5-day retreat, whatever. I knew the time frame that was going to happen. And one of the things that used to happen with my daughter is that she would come in from college at 4, 5, 6 o'clock, whichever time she came in, and she would have so much to download, and I'd be listening, and it would be like 3 hours later, 4 hours later, and there was no time for me to come up and just to regroup and to process what I'd heard. And so one of the strategies that we came up with as a mums and daughter is I went back and said, okay, so the people that, when I listen at work, they're not criticizing me. Secondly, I know how long it's going to be. And the third thing is I know that they want my kind of listening. So they want me to ask questions so they can get clarity of their own feelings, so they get clarity of what they want, and so that they can get confidence in themselves. Whereas when I'm with you and I'm listening to you, you'll say things like, oh, don't ask those questions, or don't ask me those stupid coaching questions. And then if I don't say anything at all, you go, oh, so you're not interested. And, if I give an opinion, it's wrong. So actually, the difference is when I work with my clients is they have come to me because they want coaching. They want to be asked questions because they want to get to know themselves better. They want clarity of who they are and what they want and what works for them. Whereas in my personal relationships, we didn't have that clarity before we started talking. And so I want you to think about yourself at home at the moment. If you're struggling to get heard and understood, or you're struggling to hear and understand, quite often it's because in the moment when things are a little bit, the emotions are running high, then those of you that read the book, they'll know in the curiosity we talk about the triune brain. When emotions are running high, the likelihood is we're in one of our survival brains. So the chemicals are rushing through our body. We haven't got much blood and oxygen in our neocortex brain, and we can't really make sense of things. So in the moment, that isn't the time to try to do the modelling and trying to work out what's happening. But once you've settled your state, you can look on it and reflect and go, okay, what happened? What happened just before that? What happened just before that? And start to notice your own personal patterns. And for me, the number one reason people come to me is because I'm not part of their system and I'm not going to react to it. So people just feel this immense relief when they get heard and they get understood. But if you're trying to get heard and understood while somebody else is stressed, angry, cross, upset, just to say to you, most of us, including me, are not great at listening or hearing anything else because our system is in survival state. And so we're not listening to those things outside of us. We're just trying to sort ourselves. We can't comprehend and we can't process information. So one of the things to think about is also the three things that I think about is timing and the time. So when you want to get heard and understood, it's thinking about when's the best time, what works. So a couple of conversations I've had over the last couple of weeks was about our parents. It's like, you didn't talk to your dad when you first came in from work. You gave him at least an hour. I remember for me personally, I learned very early as a young child that my mum had a bit of a morning routine. So she had a couple of cigarettes. She had a cigarette and she had a cup of tea. And she used to, no, I won't tell you that part. But you didn't speak to her until she'd gone through that morning. Because if you try and talk to her before that, she would be irritable because she hadn't quite woken up. She wasn't quite there. And so we learn that there's a good time for us to talk and there's a good time for us to listen. The other thing is about setting yourself up for success, and it's about noticing, how do you need to be to listen your best, but also how do you need to communicate or talk with clarity and confidence. And think about what kind of resource or support you need. And the bit that I notice, most people, they don't even know coaching exists. They don't know that you can talk to a coach who's objective, who's outside of the system, that can give you that time just to talk with the purpose of listening to yourself so that you hear and understand yourself. And sadly, too many people are just chatting to family and friends, hoping that the other person has the ability, the skill to know their reason for listening, knowing what they need to be paying attention to and knowing what they need to track. So when you start talking, one of the things to be aware of is that sometimes our purpose for talking is to expel and express and to get rid of any emotional tension that's in our body, that sensation, that energy that's running through you. And so we're literally, I call it downloading, we're venting or downloading. When we're talking with the purpose of just expressing how frustrated we are or how amazingly happy we are, we often don't want any response at all. We just need to know that somebody else was there sharing that moment with us. So a nod or an acknowledgement. We don't need questions. We don't need empathy or sympathy. We don't need them to say anything or do anything. We just need them to be present while we're doing that. Other kinds of listening that sometimes we need, we're talking with the purpose of, we need to know what the other person thinks because we need to have their input in order to make a decision. Another time of listening might be because we actually are talking because we want them to ask us questions to help train our attention and really think about what we're saying. And other times we want feedback, what are they noticing, what are their observations. But most of us start talking without really saying what we needed. And Karen and I, who were on retreat last week, and we've known each other for like 10 years, we've been retreating together with 5 or 6 years. There was a moment last week where I started talking about what was not working, and Karen, knowing me really well, said, have you thought about this, and made some suggestions. But it so wasn't the right response for me at the time. So I had to just sort of ask her if she could stop with the suggestions for a moment, that actually I've realised I was just venting. I didn't need any answers. And I see it with my husband quite a lot, that, you know, I'm an external processor, so quite often I just need to vent. And once I've vented, got it out of my system, I will go and find the solution. But if I don't tell my listener before I start talking that I'm only talking to vent, then they are likely to do their default, whatever their default kind of listening is. So they might be, I've got one friend who never offers a suggestion and never asks any questions. She's really good. She naturally just sits there in silence. And at first I thought it was very weird, because I just felt like she wasn't listening. And I felt quite alone when I've left a vent for long periods of time when nobody actually saying anything. But equally, when I came across Clean Language and someone asked me questions, it really helped me slow my thinking down and actually listen to what I was saying. But more importantly, notice the impacts of the words that I was using and the story that I was telling myself. And so now when I'm talking, I'm doing it more consciously. So my purpose for talking to you, is my big driver, why I come on and do videos, why I do social media, is because I know right now there's thousands of people crying tears in private because they really struggling to get heard and understood, or to hear and understand something that really matters to them. And they literally do not know that coaching or Clean Language is around, and that there's even a thing of one-to-one coaching or group coaching that can help them get to know themselves better, so they can find ways to get heard and understood, and to be able to hear and understand. And that changing the way that you listen to yourself and other people can improve your performance and your relationships. Right now, there's thousands of people feeling like that, and they don't even know this stuff exists. So my purpose for talking is to raise awareness, to educate, to support. And I hope that just by doing a video, if there's one person out there, it might be enough for them to go get curious and start researching and finding out who's out there. If not me, you know, they go and see somebody, they go and talk to somebody, rather than feeling alone and isolated. And sometimes when I do the videos, going back probably 3 or 4 years ago, if I didn't get a response, if I didn't get a like, I've got somebody with me today who's loved it and then gone. If people came on and left, or they didn't leave a comment, or they didn't engage with the video, I would sometimes feel like, at that time when I said I had a friend who didn't really say anything, I feel quite alone. Now my purpose is that mission, and I'm trusting the process. I'm trusting that if I put this stuff out there, somebody will listen to it, and it'll arrive to that person when they really need to hear it the most. But day to day, everyday conversations, just keep putting stuff out there, keep putting stuff out there, doesn't really work, because we are in the age of information. So much information is coming at us that most of us do not know how to choose what we're going to listen to, and more importantly, how to consciously choose how we act on what we've unconsciously been hearing. So if you're watching lots of videos and you're reading lots of information, be aware of your purpose for doing that. What's your purpose for listening? Are you listening to find something in particular? Or are you simply listening as a form of distraction? Is there a bit of restfulness? Are you just watching videos just for playfulness because you're having a mental break from something else? If that's working for you, that's absolutely great. So, are you listening to these videos for distraction? Are you listening because you have something you're training your attention on, you're paying attention for? As a professional listener and a trained listener, I'm first of all asking questions to get clarity of what they mean by what they say. What do their words mean? Then I'm paying attention for things that repeat, patterns. I'm looking at whether their attention is in the past, the future, or the present. Is their attention talking about what's not working or what is working? Are they talking about what they don't want, or are they talking about what they do want? And I'm also paying attention to the order that they say things and do things, so that I can get to know who they are and how they work, so that if and when they need feedback, I can give them feedback, evidence-based feedback of actually what I've heard and saw, and they can have some understanding about how that might be interpreted by other people, which helps them to have better relationships. So before I start listening, I already have a model of what I'm going to pay attention to, or what I'm tracking. I'm noticing if they're in drama, if they're criticizing themselves or other people. I'm noticing if they are trusting their own process or getting to know how they do them, the order and what works for them. I'm also noticing if the story that they're telling leaves them feeling like that, or it's like, yay, I can do this. Like, what's their narrative? What's the impact of their narrative on them? What's their why? Why are they talking to me? What do they actually want to have happen? And I see now in the age of information, we've got emails and we've got social media. In what would normally have been our downtime, maybe walking somewhere or driving somewhere, people have got their ears plugged in, they're listening to podcasts, they're listening to audiobooks, they're constantly listening to something or someone. Now, as long as you know your purpose, are you doing it to distract yourself? Are you doing it to learn something specifically? And are you listening in for something? And when you're doing all that, do you also have time when you just listen to yourself? How do you tune into who you are and what you want? And if you haven't ever been taught how to do it, sometimes that's when you need a coach or somebody like myself who will listen to you and help you train your attention on listening to yourself until you can do that on your own. And even me as a trained coach, I still have facilitation for 2.5 days a month, most months, because there's just parts of us that we cannot access without hearing it outside. And that's why clean language is such a great tool for actually reflecting back what we're actually saying and doing, from our hand gestures, from the tone of our voice to the words that we're using. When we get to hear it externally, we actually get to hear parts of us that we wouldn't get somewhere else, which is far more efficient and far more effective than trying to read things and keep looking for things that basically says what you're thinking and feeling. Whereas if you can verbalize it and express it through metaphors and words through clean language, you'll get there far quicker than scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, which will give you more time for the people and things that really matter to you. I hope you found today's useful video. Please let me know what you'd like to have happen this week. How do you need to be? And what kind of resource and support might you need? Have a great week. Speak to you soon.